Hello, I'm Kelly Taylor Ryan, and this is Mainly Unspoken. Today our guest is Steve Kelley, and he's going to be talking about scandal and war. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you.
You came back. You were here right after 9/11. What was it? Last October?
Yes, I was. I was here right after 9/11, and subsequent events that have developed during this year, have kind of prompted me to try and communicate some other developments that I have seen happening. And right now, I'd like Americans to wonder about just why the global American system is taking us to war.
Yes, that's very important.
Well, and the fact that they're taking us to war at a time when it has been exposed, the global system has been exposed as scandalous, fraudulent, and dangerous to our health care and welfare.
So when you're talking about you're talking about the corporations. You're talking about all the corporate corruption that's been coming up front.
It's big government, big business, kind of the government business synergy, the nexus or the connection of big, the system. That it's hard to distinguish the government from the corporations that fund our politicians. And this system, which has enormous consolidated power with all the mergers that we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years, this system has been caught in unprecedented corruption, defrauding millions of Americans.
So they don't have a retirement anymore.
They don't have retirement. They are losing their health care. And scandals are breaking out. This is not just a few bad apples that we're seeing. It's become clear that there is a systemic type of scandalous problem of defrauding investors, denying, forestalling, health care for Americans, no results for all the Americans that need prescription drug benefits.
Do you think, though, all this corruption that's coming to the forefront has any relation to what happened back in September?
I think that not necessarily. I think that 9/11 was a terrible tragedy, but I think that maybe, could you ask that again? I think I missed your point.
Okay, I'll ask it again. You're talking about all this corporate scandal that's happening, and we have World.com, that Enron, and they're all coming up. They're all corrupt. The books are all being cooked, and it's the corporations that sort of rule the world. We're going to war now. Probably have a war with Iraq this fall. Does any of this stuff? Does any of this corruption that's happening now has any connection at all with what happened in 9/11 when the planes hit the tower?
I think that it certainly does, because I watched a Wall Street analyst the other day commenting on WorldCom, which was 3 or 4 times bigger than Enron. And he was saying, my gosh, this thing is huge. This is the type of thing that's supposed to happen in a third world country, but not here in the U.S.
Right.
And there are consequences that I think we're all suffering right now, that we're all living through, from the Enrons of the world and from the Viacoms or the dot-coms, operating in third world countries, displacing people, dislocating them off their lands. I think that we're seeing that we are connected to the world now. And I think that the system, this globalization process that's carrying power and corruption into the four corners of the world, there's a rising rage and anger that we see. There's certainly a rising rage and anger in the Middle East. And There's been big U.S. global involvement in the Middle East for decades. And I think that, to go back to 9/11, to think that big power, big business, big government can operate with impunity, with no repercussions, I think we're learning that things are a little bit different than that.
So now, 9/11, almost a year ago, okay, and our stock market's plunging, people losing their retirement, the corporations that run the world, suddenly people don't have any confidence anymore. So are they losing power?
The corporations have been losing power, and they've been losing it in broad daylight. It's very embarrassing. It's almost like the global corporate emperor has no clothes, and now he knows it. He knows that
So he can't fool the people because everyone knows what he represents.
he knows he's in an embarrassing situation, losing credibility, losing power. I shouldn't say he, I should say it, because a corporation is not a human being. A corporation is a thing, a piece of paper. But it is losing its power. And in the past, when corporations, when whole systems have started to lose their power, there's sadly been a shocking history of going to war.
To save themselves, to save their power, to make money.
One thing that war does, Kelly, is that it consolidates the failing, slipping, embarrassed, decadent powers that be that have been caught in scandal, have been caught in fraudulence. And there has been example after example of failed systems going to war, externalizing their problems instead of dealing with internal structural reforms. That story is as old as Greek tragedy, where the oracle or the princess or the goddess of war goes to the king and says, you can either correct an injustice within your own land, you can either right some wrongs that were done within your own tribe, or you can become a great empire as the alternative. That's out of Sophocles. War, also, I think last time that I spoke with you, I cited an old political adage that has been borne out over these last months, and that is that when war begins, all attempts at reform are over. They end. And now, lo and behold, we're not going to get a prescription drug benefit. We're certainly not going to get universal health care. And, you know, instead the system is promising us a years-long or decades-long conflict.
They're not promising much. They're promising us war. And they're promising if we give up all our rights, they're going to do everything in their power to protect us.
They're promising us that we're going to lose a lot of our rights, which is not much of a thing to celebrate. And
no, it's not, and it's making us powerless.
It's kind of strange that, you know, the system is telling us who our enemies are.
Yes, that's
right.
right.
And they're locating this mostly as, you know, a lot of them are said to be third world shepherds living in tents in the mountains of Afghanistan. And yes, you know, there were Arab peoples that struck America on 9/11, although now we find out that the FBI said leave those al-Qaeda suspects in American flight training schools alone.
That's right.
There were field agents screaming bloody murder that there were known al-Qaeda suspects being trained to fly American planes, not to land them.
So that has to tell you that somebody in this country was sort of leaving the door open. Okay, they want to attack us, we'll let them. I mean, isn't that kind of what happened? Maybe?
FBI supervisors went out of their way to block investigation of these Arab nationals that had been to meetings with Osama bin Laden. And these guys were in American flight schools, learning how to fly planes while they were in the air, not how to land them, not how to take them off. I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, but, you know, It's something that is being investigated right now, but I think it's being covered up pretty well.
But that leaves us, who's our real enemy then? I mean, if the FBI is blocking information about these people that are trying to attack us, who is the real enemy?
That's a good question, and I think that Americans need to think seriously and deeply about who the enemy is right now in America. Right now, we're being told that it's third world peoples that hate America, although there's certainly been decades of foreign policy that might cause some people to resent America.
But they don't have the resources and the means to come over in here and hurt us unless they're being helped.
I just wonder if the enemy comes from, the tents in Afghanistan, or if it comes from the corporate suites in America, where what I would call billionaire terrorists are denying Americans drugs at an affordable, reasonable price, where decisions are being made daily to deny health care for tens of millions of Americans. They're telling us that we're not going to get health care. And these are people that are making day-to-day decisions that are affecting tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people. And I think that it just might be that the people in the three-piece suits on Wall Street pose more of a clear and present danger to our national security than some, political shepherds in the mountains of Afghanistan living in tents. And I think we may need to redefine what threats to what constitute the most serious threats to our national security.
Okay, what are the biggest threats against us?
We're losing our jobs.
And why are we losing our jobs?
Because the global corporate scam that has exported a lot of our jobs, the computer, the high-tech industry, we find that people don't need 14 different computers per household. And I think that we're finding that certainly the economy is dropping. There's no bottom that's been found yet to the stock market. And
saying that the economy is dropping, I think is kind of minimal. I think we're in a disaster with the economy. I mean, the banks are closing in Latin America. For sure, that's going to affect us.
And I think all the more reason that the system has all the more reason to tell us to pay attention to other things. That when I say the global emperor has no clothes, the system knows that it's been caught in a very embarrassing, even criminal.
And the system is Corporation America.
Corporate and government.
Well, corporations run the government, essentially. The government is sort of just puppets for the big corporate billionaires? Corporate
financing, even though campaign financing, so-called, was passed. Many other ways of funneling money to politicians, of getting around campaign financing is being done right now. And right now, the upcoming election is pretty much being bought out by corporate financing.
Absolutely. But when you say that, who are the real terrorists in a way, are our enemies, and we're talking about corporate America, and you're saying because they're not allowing health care and they're not going to be allowing this, but they're also opening the doors and helping Arab people, terrorists, to come in and terrorize our country. I mean, isn't that what they're doing? They're not just blocking health care and prescription stuff. They're actually opening the doors and making opportunities for the people who do hate us to come in and hurt us. Is that not true? Or?
If what the FBI field agents in Phoenix and in Wisconsin, they are saying that their local investigations of suspected Al-Qaeda, this is stupefying, Kelly, to think that FBI supervisors would stonewall and threaten field agents that were reporting associates of Osama bin Laden learning to fly airplanes while they were in the air and not learning to land them safely or to take them off safely. The FBI supervisors, when the reports were received from the field agents, the supervisors repeatedly and persistently told the field agents in Phoenix, no, leave these guys alone. At that time, there was plenty of insider knowledge on Wall Street that the economy was failing. And there was all kinds of insider information in business and in government that massive financial scandals were going to rock this nation.
They knew that was going to happen before 9/11.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. There was a clear need to take the public's mind off the scandals that were coming. And they knew they were coming. All the insiders bailed out with a mega amount of American investor wealth. There was an enormous transfer of redistribution of wealth because of these financial frauds. The insiders who bought low and sold high made unprecedented fortunes. And now, the same leaders in the government that are telling us to fight this war against indigenous, local, third world peoples, where did these leaders, where have they come from? They've come from the Enrons. They've come from the Halliburtons.
That's right.
They've come from the WorldCom and Verizon. So suddenly, the corporations and the whole system, the whole government corporate system that has provided us with massive financial fraud, with unscrupulous ripping off of investors, is now telling us that we're going to be going to war against third world peoples that these same corporations have outraged and dispossessed of their lands. So it's like the status quo, the elite powers that be, that have caused outrage in the third world, that has come home to hit us here in America, are now telling us that these third world peoples that were outraged by globalization policy in the Middle East and all around the world, we're now being told that these people are our enemies, that we're going to be fighting in combat.
In reality, corporate America is our enemy for the most part. Some of them.
It seems to me that the big, mega corporation conglomerates, transnationals, that have stirred up people against the United States are responsible for the outrage that is felt towards the United States.
But it's more than that, Steve. Don't you think it's more than the outrage that they're making them angry, they're making them furious at us, and then they're handing them the guns, they're opening the doors, allowing them to come and attack us? It's not just they're provoking them, and they're giving them the means to come and hurt us. That's pretty bad. The
time without number in history, failing, corrupt, embarrassed regimes invariably found themselves taking their nation to war, which stops all inquiries, stops all queries into the decadence and the corruption of those regimes.
But they're doing that with Homeland Security and the U.S. Patriot Act. I mean, and they wrote what the Homeland Security way before 9/11.
Right.
And essentially, it says that, hey, if Ashcroft, what's he, the U.S. Attorney General, right? Okay? He says, hey, if I think you're a terrorist, then you're a terrorist. I mean, what's the definition of a terrorist? They have basically put handcuffs and gags on every American there is, because if you speak out against the country, what you're saying today, they could just come on in and take you away for 6 months.
Actually, Kelly,
you're speaking against the country.
What I'm saying today could be construed by John Ashcroft as subversive.
Yes, I would say so.
And in spite of what Republicans and other pro-gun rights people say, we're going to be seeing crackdown on individual freedoms and firearm ownership in this country.
Absolutely.
Under color of national security.
And when you say color of national security, you mean that's not true national security. And the color of law means fake law, right? Make sure people understand what that means.
I think the elite powers that be that have just ripped all of these American investors and consumers off. And by the way, if they do that to Americans, if multinational corporations would do what they have just done to the American people, imagine what they would do to third world peoples.
Oh, they have no respect for them. They'd walk all over them. Would they kill them off? I mean, it seems to me that part of corporate America, part of the globalization of the world, they want to get rid of part of the population. Is that not true? Have you ever thought about that?
I think that what we're seeing now in the Middle East, and specifically in Israel, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, is a perfect recipe for disaster and for war. There is no peace initiative that I can see that's sincere or realistic on the part of the United States.
America doesn't want peace. America wants what? Not Americans. I think we're all against sending our children to war. But those who have the power to say what our country does, they want the war.
They want the war. It takes the focus off on these scandals.
Right.
And also it makes fortunes for people in war profiteering, where now I find this kind of amusing, although it's not so amusing. President Bush is saying that all these companies that they're kind of unpatriotically, technically going offshore so they don't have to pay their income taxes. If they want their war contracts, they're going to have to stay and pay their income taxes, and then they'll get their war contracts.
Well, that's an incentive, huh? What an incentive.
Well, that's really cracking down on the corporations. And again, we're now paying for brutal policies. The Enrons, the Dow Chemical factories all over the world have displaced peoples from their land, taken over local business. This is frequently resented, Kelly. And now we're learning that so much of the world really is outraged at the American government and system. They like Americans, you know, on an individual basis. They don't like our government.
No, they don't. But how is all this going to affect the average Mainer? You know, how is it going to affect the average Mainer? They've already lost their retirement. A lot of people are.
During this period of war that is deepening and spreading throughout the world.
And going to Iraq, probably. You know.
Going to Iraq for starters, I think that we may be seeing conflagration breaking out all over the Middle East, including Palestine. I forget my original point. I was heading somewhere.
I asked you, how is this going to affect the average Mainer?
Mainers. For one thing, we're falling into so much national debt that certainly will affect us. I don't think we're going to get much relief on prescription drug coverage. It appears to be dead in the Senate now. And already they're saying that, well, there's a war on. You know, we have to sacrifice, although I don't know how much more senior citizens are going to be able to sacrifice.
That's right.
And in terms of the way it affects Mainers, I think that President Bush has just received fast-track approval in this kind of war emergency. They want him to have all kinds of, you know, quick emergency powers to approve global trade agreements that can actually override local law in Maine.
So that's even taking more of our states right away. Well, he's just not taking away local laws. I mean, he's sort of overstepping what the Constitution is allowing him to begin with, isn't he?
Well, These are special times.
These are special times.
But that's always
right.
the excuse when you subvert democracy. It's always an exception.
But what's going to happen, though, is the banks are going to probably go under, okay? And when the banks go under, there's going to be more bank foreclosures than you've seen, I mean, mortgage foreclosures that you've seen for a long time.
That's exactly correct. And that's exactly why I believe we are on the track to war. Because as Rumsfeld and others are now saying, peacetime is over. Yes, we've got scandals, but now we're going to learn to prosper under a war economy.
We're going to learn to prosper under a war economy. So we're living in a war economy, and people need to hear that.
Government contracts, Pentagon spending, although that's our money. We're funding these big corporations now. It's like they're double dipping on us, you know.
That's right.
And
Our money and our lives.
other corrupt, failed regimes have promised their nation redemption through war before. Germany certainly did. Pinochet in Chile did in his war against, you know, the local peasantry there. We are now heading towards a plan to redeem America during wartime. And I think that Americans should be very, very alarmed about that.
Now, we only have 3 minutes left, so can you explain yourself a little bit more? What do they need to be alarmed about?
We need to look and see the signs that we're losing our freedom, that we're losing our jobs, that we're losing our savings, that the banks are failing. We need to see that world war is spreading, resentment against global corporate government war is spreading all around the world, that the United States and just a couple of other allies, Israel would be one of them, is growing increasingly isolated in the world community.
Do you think we're going to have nuclear war?
Yes, I think that as outrage rises here in America and around the world, I think all of this mega tonnage that they keep hanging around when they should have gotten rid of it, if 2 million demonstrators, or for that matter 5 million demonstrators show up in Washington demanding food, health care, that's an unprecedented demonstration. And I think that the mega tonnage of nuclear weapons can be used to manage the mega millions of resistors to government policy. In other words, I can see a scenario where there's massive protest and then a nuclear device goes off somewhere. At that point, everybody goes home.
Everyone goes home and not much home to go to.
Everyone goes home. They're told to shut up under national security emergency. Many governments that were failing and systems that were failing have engineered disasters to scare their populations before. This is no grand or grandiose conspiracy theory. If you have the firepower, if you have the megatonnage, if you have the means to block massed people movements, mass demonstrations, it's just doing business.
30 seconds, final thought.
I'll end the same way I did in my first interview with you. A corporation is not a human being. Corporation is a thing without a heart, without morals, without scruples. It controls our government right now.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Kelly.
Come back again.
Maybe I will.
Okay. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.